Next up, we have a short film from the Jane and Terry Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior at UCLA. The Semel Institute is a pioneering research and education institute devoted to understanding the complexities of human behavior on many levels. So let's take a look.
In order to understand the mind, we've opened our minds. To see what hasn't been glimpsed, to break through into new levels of discovery, we ask questions that drive research today so that it may become the cures of tomorrow. We are explorers who delve into the most complex structure known to man so that our most challenging questions can be solved. And committed to discover the treatments that turn mental illness into mental health. We envision a day when Alzheimer's is a distant memory. When autism is just another human variation. When depression is overcome, addictions are released, and a paradigm shift in beliefs erases the pain of stigma. We are at the forefront of grasping the biology of genius and creativity and the complex links between the mind and body. Bringing together extraordinary minds across disciplines, interacting to find the answers that can heal our most human challenges, and training the next generation to go even further. This is the center of a revolution in neuroscience. Here, we strive to open our minds even further. Because we must.
So that film is a great segue to what we have next. And I have notes so that I'll remember, because more and more lately I think of the Nora Ephron book, that hilarious title, I Remember Nothing. So, all right, Dr. Kelsey Martin, Dean of the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA, who you saw earlier in the Optimists video, will be speaking with 3 experts on brain health in women. Dr. Susan Bookheimer is a professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute. Shari Staglin is co-founder of the nonprofit One Mind and a visionary philanthropist. And Dr. Nanthia Suthana, who studies memory, is an assistant professor of psychiatry, neurosurgery, and psychology at the David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. Dr. Martin, I'll be listening, so very closely.
Well, thank you. It's really wonderful to be here. I feel so honored to be here with all of you and with my wondrous colleagues and admired friends here. And this is that was a great, as Lisa said, a great segue to this session that's focused on the brain and really trying to understand how the brain mediates who we are, how we feel, how we think, what we imagine. The brain is affected by our genetics. It's affected by the environment, as we heard earlier from Goldie and from Poppy. It's affected how we feel about ourselves. It's affected how we treat each other. And I have to say, being in this room, women are really good at treating each other well. And I think it would be, the more we can learn about that from looking at brain function, the better off we'll be. So today's speakers include scientists and advocates whose work focuses on understanding brain function and brain health, and the way that their work really changes the way that we think about these issues and helps shape our understanding. Earlier, you saw a video about the Depression Grand Challenge that featured a UCLA colleague, Dr. Michelle Krask. And I do want to just take a moment to tell you a little bit about the Depression Grand Challenge. So the depression is recognized by the World Health Organization to be the leading cause of disability worldwide. And in 2013, the UCLA community came together across the campus to really try to think of what we could do working collectively to address a major societal problem, and together decided that we really wanted to attack depression. We've been working over the past many years, and the Depression Grand Challenge really has 4 interconnected components. One component is discovery neuroscience, trying to understand what in the brain goes awry during depression. Another that's called the 100,000 person study that's looking at 100,000 different individuals and to try to understand how their genetics and their environment and their experiences contribute to different forms of depression, that we can really get at the root of depression. And that's connected to an innovative treatment network that's focused on providing care at different levels to individuals, and it includes a large screening effort for UCLA undergraduates. And a 4th component that's called awareness and hope, and that's focused on using research to understand and eliminate the stigma that's associated with depression. And the idea and really the hope is that by increasing awareness and understanding, the Depression Grand Challenge will draw attention to this human problem, and that kind of openness will help alleviate the suffering that affects so many individuals, people here in this room and people who we love. But we have such wonderful panelists today that I want to begin by asking them questions to learn more about brain health. And so let's start. So Shari, I wonder if from your experience, you can tell us about the warning signs that parents should be aware of that might indicate a brain disorder in their children.
Thank you. And our son, Brandon, has a lived experience with schizophrenia and depression and anxiety and OCD. So he runs the gamut. And so our family has that same lived experience to go through that with him and help him. And the way that we found out that Brandon was sick, we didn't know because he was our firstborn, that he was not following the usual patterns of being a teenager. But the first clue that we had was when he was 14. He was either 12 or 14. We were on a ski trip, and he woke us up about 10:30 at night and said he was looking out the window and he couldn't tell whether the stars were real or whether they were something not real. And he was very disturbed, and we sort of talked him out of it and said, you know, you just had a bad dream, I'm sure everything's fine. And so then he went back to bed. He tried to calm himself with music, with his earphones, and that did not work. But he finally fell off to sleep. He said then that he never wanted to feel like that again, and he did when he had his psychotic break at the age of 18 in 1990. The things that led up to that we missed are he decided to get his wisdom teeth, all 4 of them pulled on elective surgery, parents' weekend when we went back to Dartmouth. So he couldn't really talk to us, and he couldn't really eat. And then my daughter was sleeping in his dorm room, and the other roommate had gone home for a spring break. And she said that he had to have this strange music playing. So change in sleep patterns is another thing to watch out for. Withdrawal, he definitely did have social withdrawal throughout high school. We said, okay, we were social, he doesn't have to be like us. He likes to play his video games alone in his room. So these are the kinds of things, and what things that he didn't tell us that your child might is that he was hearing somebody call his name and there was no one there. So these kinds of things, social withdrawal, restlessness, hearing things that are not there, those are big clues.
And now, with the experience that you have, are there ways that you feel that you would have been able to probe that earlier, or?
I think that had we known what we know now, because thank goodness of the studies that were done 20 years ago go on now at UCLA, we would know what the clues are to watch for, which is the things that I just mentioned, and to get him some help earlier. The sooner you can get help before these breaks happen, the better off the child is. They will always live with this disorder, but they will be able to manage it through meds and through therapy and through self-management, which is what Brandon does, including digital health, which is brain games and meditation. He does all these things.
Susan, what can you tell us about what you've learned from your research about women's health and what diet, environment, experience, how that affects brain health in women specifically?
Yes, just as if diet and exercise and all low stress, all of those things affect your body, they also affect your brain and your brain health. And this is very important for all of us to know. As we get older in particular, a lot of changes take place, particularly with menopause. We experience a loss of hormones. We may change our diet, we may gain weight more easily, and all of these are factors that contribute to brain health or lack of health as we get older. We know that diet is very important, that antioxidants, for example, appear to be protective against the cognitive decline that normally occurs with aging, and that diabetes is a major risk factor for Alzheimer's disease. We also know that exercise appears to have some protection for these disorders of aging. That's very important. And we also know that hormones associated with menopause affect our cognition. And they seem to reduce our cognition. They may make us at higher risk for developing dementia down the road. And it does seem as if some hormone replacement therapy, at least initially, may mitigate some of those symptoms of cognitive decline.
So Nanthia, what tools are being developed to really address some of these issues about memory and memory loss?
So aside from, everyday lifestyle changes that can help prevent some of these things, for very severe cases, where patients have epilepsy or traumatic brain injuries or Alzheimer's disease, there are tools being developed to, sort of communicate with the brain and modulate brain activity. We call these neuromodulation techniques that my laboratory uses. And so as we start to learn the language of the brain, which is electricity, essentially, we can start to use tools to communicate with the brain using electricity, using external stimulation to affect brain areas within, or even implant electrodes in very severe cases, deep brain stimulation to modulate brain activity, to help patients who are very severely affected with memory impairments or movement disorders, as it's been successfully used before. And now even neuropsychiatric disorders are being looked at using neuromodulation.
And your lab uses virtual reality in a really sort of, for me, fun way. And I want to hear a little bit about what you've learned using virtual reality about the brain, and even to speculate a little bit about we're living in a world where there's probably going to be more and more virtual reality, and what impact is that going to have on our brains?
Yeah, so virtual reality, I've been following it for a long time, but in the last 5 years, it's made huge leaps and bounds, and it is really ready to be integrated into the healthcare and medical research areas. And so my lab uses it as a tool to do two things. One is to simulate the real world. Classically, traditionally, research scientists, we use two-dimensional computer screens to test things like memory. And it's just not realistic. It's not how you would interact with the world on an everyday basis and learn things and remember things. And if we're really trying to develop therapies for things like Alzheimer's disease, we need a way to simulate real-world experiences to test those therapies. And that's where virtual reality comes into play. So it allows us to use a more realistic environment that is still controlled. We can control it as scientists, and test whether these new therapies, these neuromodulation techniques actually would work in the real world. So that's one thing it can do. And the second is to just help us understand how the brain works in everyday experiences. So simulating real world experiences so that we can, and using that simultaneously with brain recording measurements to understand how the brain works as we're remembering things successfully or unsuccessfully, and hopefully develop treatments for patients, who have severe memory impairments.
So, Shari, in addition to technology having uses in terms of learning more about the brain, technology can be therapeutic. And you touched on a little bit about the ways in which different brain games, for example, have been helpful to your son, Brandon. Can you expand a little bit about what specifically has been developed for sort of diagnostic and therapeutic
Sure.
use?
And I'm happy that we were able to fund some of these through our nonprofit in the early years, some of the first ones. One of them that's helped my son a lot and helps me is Brain HQ. And that one is, you can address many different potential mental illnesses as well as memory, which is what I do it for when I remember to do it. But there are several of them like that, and our nonprofit, One Mind, has a subdivision called Cyber Guide, PSYBERGUIDE, which on this website you will find evaluations of these many myriad of apps that are available now, and you will see evaluations of each one, so you can help decide whether they're worth your while or not, whether they're, if you have to pay for them, are they going to be worth it? Because they're, of course, lots of people have jumped in to try to make a fast buck, and you have to make sure you know what you're getting when you get an app for your brain. The other one, there's meditation apps. One of them that I use, but then I get sort of tired of it, is Headspace. So I'm kind of behind on that. But truly, these things are helpful and can guide you on meditation, and then you can kind of go off and do it on your own without this guidance. So these are very helpful, I think.
I think it's really important what Shari's bringing up, that is that I think we tend to think that things like dementia and cognitive decline are inevitable, but there are things that we can do to help ourselves, and meditation is one of them. We talked earlier about stress and stress reduction and the effect of stress and depression on brain health. Stress is very toxic to the brain. Depression is very toxic to the brain. It's toxic to cognition. It affects our sleep, which in turn is further toxic to our brain. And so things we can do to ameliorate that are to work on our stress reduction using a variety of techniques, to exercise our brain and our body. Physical exercise actually is helpful for reducing cognitive impairments associated with aging. So there's a lot that we can do, not just diet modification, but exercise modification, exercising our brain, getting better sleep, and general mental health, stress reduction and depression reduction that can improve our lives for the long run.
I think that sort of gets back to this whole point that Poppy Jamie brought up about neuroplasticity and the fact that we can actually change the way that our brain is connected, and these sorts of technologies and games and meditation and exercise all have a really dramatic impact on that. And it's really clear when you're very young, but it persists throughout your life, and I think it's important for us to always try to help our brain plasticity.
One of the things that they say is most helpful
Yeah.
is learning a second language when you're older.
Yeah.
That we have to learn quite a bit. Our brains have to work very hard to do this, and this is very helpful.
Right. So Susan, you also use technology in your lab, and specifically use functional MRI to really look at how social relationships affect the brain, and in particular in the context of autism. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how social relationships or an insufficiency of social relationships cause changes in the brain and impact brain health.
Yes, so good social contacts, good social interaction is actually important throughout the lifespan. So even from a very early age, that important relationship between an infant and their mother really sets up a life of healthy living. And we know that early deprivation, for example, children who have been put into orphanages at a very young age, that is extremely toxic to the brain. It causes serious changes in brain structure and ultimately in brain function, and creates a lifelong sensitivity to stress. any kind of negative effects, negative experiences in life are exacerbated by these early experiences. We also know that in adolescence, social interaction is extremely important. In a sense, adolescence is a period of dramatic brain growth, brain change related to the social world. We suddenly become interested in the outside world, very responsive to the emotions and reactions of others, very susceptible to peer pressure, which is the downside of that. So, and we've also shown that in old age, even patients with very severe Alzheimer's disease respond positively in their behavior to having social interactions, even when they can't speak or show any overt signs of recognizing their loved ones. They behave better when their loved ones are there. So we know that throughout the lifespan, positive social interactions are extremely important to brain health.
So Nanthia, there is a bridge between the research lab and the doctor's office. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how clinical treatments can move forward with innovative technology and how we can bring some of the advances that are made in the laboratories here at UCLA to really impact patient care.
Sure, yeah. One of the most important things is that doctors, clinicians need to be willing, and engineers need to be willing to talk to each other. That's the main bottleneck to getting these things to work. And sometimes that language is different. So, being willing to communicate and work through some of those language, communication challenges to bring some of this technology into the clinic. The second thing that's been really helpful, at least in my case, is, endowments and small funds to just help start these, risky projects. Actually, my lab started with funding from Friends of the Semel, which got some data that I was able to use to get grants. So usually we need data to get those bigger grants, and that's been very helpful in my case. So small investments into these riskier pilot projects to bring innovative technology into clinical applications that are actually useful to patients, need both of those things, and I think UCLA has been doing a very good job in that area, continues to do so.
So I do really want to underscore one thing that Nanthia said, and if any of you haven't seen it, if you go online and you look up Nanthia Suthana, and there's a video of her work using virtual reality to understand brain function, and it's a great example of how you get a psychologist, neuroscientist like Nanthia working together with engineers who can build incredible virtual reality systems together with clinicians who work with patients who have a variety of different brain disorders. And when they come together with all that expertise, can sort of make magic happen. It's really worth watching. So Shari, you prefer using the nomenclature of brain health over mental health or mental illness. And can you tell us briefly why and what brought about your evolution in thinking here?
Research brought about our evolution in thinking because as we tried to figure out why people had mental illnesses, it was all about the brain. We learned more and more about the brain. Everything comes back to the brain. And also, more importantly, there's no discrimination against the brain. It's an organ of the body like the heart or the kidneys, and it should be treated equally. It should have equal treatment, and we shouldn't stigmatize anything at all related to mental illness. We call it brain illness. If it's brain illness, people get it. It's a physical sickness. No shame, no blame, nobody's fault. So what started out in 1995 as the Music Festival for Mental Health is now the Music Festival for Brain Health. And that's one of the main ways in which we raise money to support starting early stage research on the brain. And that's why we use that term.
I like it.
Thank you.
A lot. So I want to have a question for all three of you, which is really, given your research, given your knowledge base and your experience, what do you think we should all be doing differently for optimal brain health for ourselves and for our children, and I'd add for our parents?
I think that we're entering a phase where we have to think about disease prevention rather than treatment. Okay. I think that medicine till now has been focused on treating the problem once it's diagnosed. And in the case of a disorder, for example, like Alzheimer's disease, by the time somebody has advanced Alzheimer's disease and gets that diagnosis, the brain has really been ravaged. So I think that we really need to be moving now towards a time of prevention where we look at all of the factors, both psychological factors and lifestyle factors, as well as risk factors like genetics that influence the probability that someone may get Alzheimer's disease or any of the other genetically determined diseases, and start to intervene in this very early preclinical stage, and actually even in youth, teaching people to engage in healthy lifestyles from a very early time and bring that all the way through their lives so that we can begin to think about prevention of Alzheimer's rather than treatment. And I think that's not just true for Alzheimer's, but true for many, many disorders. We're doing the same kind of research in autism now, trying to identify early risk factors in the first 6 weeks of life, up through the first year of life, when we know that the diagnosis doesn't actually occur usually until at least age 3. But we also know that early intervention is far superior. So prevention, I think, is really where we're going to be going in the future for all of these disorders.
Shari?
Oh, singing.
Singing?
My 2-year-old granddaughter sings, "Hello, everybody. So glad to see you, so glad to see you." Doesn't that make you happy to hear that? You women of wonder, amazing. No, I just wanted to sing that to you today. And I will tell Cicely I did.
And I am sure that singing helps with brain plasticity.
I'm sure it does.
I'm sure it does too. Nanthia, any thoughts?
I think everything has been said. I second, both of that and the singing as well.
Great. All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you.